Chapter 10. An Explosion. Day after day the spider waited, head down, for an idea to come to her. Hour by hour she sat motionless, deep in thought. Having promised Wilbur that she would save his life, she was determined to keep her promise. Charlotte was naturally patient. She knew from experience that if she waited long enough, a fly would come to her web, and she felt sure that if she had waited long enough to think about Wilbur's problem, an idea would come to her mind. Finally, one morning toward the middle of July, the idea came. Why, how perfectly simple, she said to herself. The way to save Wilbur's life is to play a trick on Zuckerman. If I can fool a bug, thought Charlotte, I can surely fool a man. People are not nearly as smart as bugs. Wilbur walked into his yard just at that moment. What are you thinking about, Charlotte? He asked. Well, I was just thinking that people are very gullible. What does gullible mean? Easy to fool, said Charlotte. That's a mercy, said Wilbur as he lay down, and then he went to sleep. The spider, however, stayed wide awake, gazing affectionately at him and making plans for his future. Summer was half gone. She knew she did not have much time. That morning, just as Wilbur fell asleep, Avery Arable wandered into the Zuckerman's front yard, followed by Fern. Avery carried a live frog in his hand. Fern had a crown of daisies in her hair. The children ran for the kitchen. Just in time for a piece of blueberry pie, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Look at my frog, said Avery, placing the frog on the drain board and holding out his hand for a piece of pie. Take that thing out of here, said Mrs. Zuckerman. He's hot, said Fern. He's almost dead, that frog. He is not, said Avery. He lets me scratch him between his eyes. The frog jumped and landed in Mrs. Zuckerman's dishpan full of soapy water. You're getting pie on you, said Fern. Can I look for eggs in the hen house, Aunt Edith? Run outdoors, both of you, and don't bother the hens. It's getting all over everything, shouted Fern. His pie is all over his front. Come on, Frog, cried Avery. He scooped up his frog. The frog kicked, splashing soapy water into the blueberry pie. Another crisis, groaned Fern. Let's swing on the swing, said Avery. The children ran to the barn. Mr. Zuckerman had the best swing in the county. It was a single long piece of heavy rope tied to a beam over a north doorway. At the bottom end of the rope was a knot to sit on, and it was arranged so that you could swing without being pushed. You climbed a ladder to the hayloft, then holding onto the rope you stood at the edge and looked down, and you were scared and dizzy. Then you straddled the knot so it acted like a seat, and you got up all your nerve, took a deep breath, and jumped. For a second you seemed to be falling to the barn floor far below, but then suddenly the rope would start to catch you, and you would sail through the barn door, going a mile a minute with the wind whistling in your eyes and ears and hair. Then you would zoom upward to the sky, look at the clouds, and the rope would twist and turn. And then you would drop down, 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 down out of the sky and come sailing back to the barn, almost into the hayloft, and then sail out again, but not quite as far this time. Then in again, but not quite so high, and then out again and in again and out again, and then you jump off and fall down and let someone else try. Mothers for miles around worried about Zuckerman's swing. They feared some child would fall off, but no child ever did. Children almost always hang on to things tighter than their parents think that they will. Avery put the frog in his pocket and climbed to the hayloft. The last time I swang on this swing, I almost crashed into a barn swallow, he said. Take that frog out, said Fern. Avery straddled the rope and jumped. He sailed out through the door, frog and all, into the sky, frog and all, and then back into the barn. Your tongue is purple, cried Fern. So is yours, said Avery. I have hay inside my dress and it itches, said Fern. Scratch it, said Avery, yelling back. It's my turn, said Fern. Jump off. Fern's got the itch, saying Avery. When he jumped off, he threw the swing up at his sister. She shut her eyes tight and jumped. She felt the dizzy drop and then supported the lift of the swing, and when she opened her eyes, she was looking up into the blue sky and was about ready to turn back and fly back through the door. They took turns for over an hour. When the children grew tired of swinging, they went down to the pasture and picked wild raspberries and ate them. Their tongues turned purple to red. Fern bit into a raspberry that had a bad-tasting bug inside it and got very discouraged. Avery found an empty candy box and put his frog inside. The frog seemed tired after all the morning in the swing. The children walked slowly to the barn. They too were tired and hardly had the energy to walk. Let's build a tree house, said Avery. I want to live in a tree with my frog. I'm going to visit Wilbur, Fern announced. They climbed the fence into the lane and walked over to the pig pen. When Wilbur heard them coming and got up, Avery noticed the spider, and coming closer, she saw Charlotte. Hey, look at that big spider, he said. It's tremendous. Leave it alone, said Fern. You got a frog, isn't that enough? "That's a fine spider, and I'm going to capture it," said Avery. He took the cover off his candy box and picked up a stick. "I'm going to knock that old spider right into this box," he said. Wilbur's heart almost stopped when he saw what was going on. This might be the end of Charlotte if the boy succeeded in catching her. "You stop it, Avery," cried Fern. Avery put one leg over the pig pen. He was just about to raise his stick to hit Charlotte when he lost his balance. He swayed and toppled and landed at the top of Wilbur's trough. The trough tipped up and came down with a slap. The goose egg was right underneath. There was a dull explosion as the egg broke, and it was a horrible smell. Fern screamed. Avery jumped to his feet. The air was filled with terrible gases and smells from the rotten egg. Templeton, who had been resting in his home, scuttled into the barn. "Good night," screamed Avery. "Good night, what a stink! Let's get out of here." Fern was crying. She held her nose and ran to the house. Avery ran past, holding his nose. Charlotte felt greatly relieved that it was a narrow escape. Later that morning, the animals came up from the pasture. The sheep, the lambs, the gander, the goose, and the 7 goslings. There were many complaints about the awful smell, and Wilbur had to tell the story over and over again, just how the arable boy had tried to capture Charlotte and how the smell of the broken egg drove him away just in time. "It was that rotten goose egg that saved Charlotte's life," said Wilbur. The goose was proud of her share in the adventure. "I'm delighted that egg never hatched," she said. Templeton, of course, was miserable over the loss of his beloved egg, but he could not resist boasting. "It pays to save things," he said. "A rat never knows when something's going to come in handy. We don't throw anything away." "Well," said one of the lambs, "this whole business is all well and good for Charlotte, but what about the rest of us? The smell is unbearable. Who wants to live in a barn that's perfumed like a rotten egg?" "Don't worry, you'll get used to it," said Templeton. He sat up and pulled wisely at his long whiskers and then crept away to pay a visit to the dump. When Lurvy showed up at lunchtime carrying a pail of food for Wilbur, he stopped a few paces from the pig pen. He sniffed the air and made a bad face. "What in thunder?" he said. Setting the pail down, he picked up the stick that Avery had dropped and pried the trough up. "Rats," he said. "Phew! I should have known that a rat would make a nest under this trough. How I hate a rat." And Lurvy dragged Wilbur's trough across the yard and kicked some dirt into the rat's nest, burying the broken egg and all of Templeton's other possessions. Then he picked up the pail. Wilbur stood in the trough, drooling with hunger. Lurvy poured. The slops ran creamily down the pig's eyes and ears. Wilbur grunted. He gulped and sucked and gulped, making swishing and swooshing noises, anxious to get it all at once. It was a delicious meal to get everything: skim milk, wheat middlings, leftover pancakes, half a donut, the rind of summer squash, 2 pieces of stale toast, third of a ginger snap, a fish tail, 1 orange peel, several noodles from noodle soup, the scum off of the cup of cocoa, an ancient jelly roll, a strip of paper from the lining of the garbage pail, and a spoonful of raspberry jello. Wilbur ate heartily. He planned to leave half a noodle and a few drops for Templeton, but then he remembered the rat had been useful in saving Charlotte's life, and that Charlotte was trying to save his life, so he left a whole noodle instead of half. Now that the broken egg was buried, the air cleared and the barn smelled good again. The afternoon passed and evening came, and the shadows lengthened. The cool and kindly breath of the evening entered through the doors and windows. Astride her web, Charlotte sat moodily eating a horsefly and thinking about the future. After a while, she bestirred herself. She settled to the center of the web, and there she'd be able to cut some of her lines. She worked slowly but steadily, while the other creatures dozed. Now, none of the others, even the goose, noticed that she was at work. Deep in his soft bed, Wilbur snoozed. Over in their favorite corner, the goslings whistled the night song. Charlotte tore quite a section of her web, leaving an open space in the middle. Then she started weaving something to take the place of the threads that she had removed. When Templeton got back from the dump around midnight, the spider was still at work.